It's proving to be an eventful week here in this part of the world, with summits among global leaders leading up to a space launch in South Korea later on this Wednesday evening if all goes according to plan. So what are the implications of this latest launch of Korea's homegrown space rocket, Nuri? And what is the latest regarding North Korea's plans to shoot up its first spy satellite? Meanwhile, what are foreign correspondents saying about the recent flurry of top-level diplomatic engagements? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today, we touch upon the latest stories here in this part of the world that are making headlines elsewhere as well. For more, I have Sebastien Falletti here in the studio with me. Sebastien, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Nicola Smith with us. Nicola, it's good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
Right, Sebastien, South Korea is scheduled to shoot for the stars for a third time today. What do you believe are the implications of South Korea's advances in space exploration?
Of course, indeed, the countdown is almost started now. And of course, this is happening against the backdrop of a competition on the peninsula for space. We know that actually South Korea is playing catch-up with North Korea, which was ahead and launched its first satellite already almost a decade ago. And we know that Kim Jong-un is planning to launch a so-called surveillance satellite soon. So this is happening in that context. I think the main rationale is security strategy, and also, I mean, there's both prestige but also security issue at stake. I mean, prestige is of course the rivalry between Seoul and Pyongyang on any field, but also it comes to a more important, tangible security issue, which is about the future of the nuclear arsenal in North Korea. We know that having the ability to observe what the enemy is doing is critical, and North Korea is probably developing also its capability in this field in the context of building up a nuclear full arsenal, and South Korea on its side cannot stay idle. And then there's a bigger picture, of course, is that I mean, space is becoming increasingly important in the future of warfare all around the globe, and so it's important for a country to develop its capability in this field on the long term. So this is part of a project. We know that they will run until 2027. It's more than $1.1 billion investment, and there will be 3 more launches. So this is an important one because for the first time they want to put into orbit some real satellite, not the dummy one we had 1 year ago in June. So let's see what happens. We remember there had been some failure in the past, so hopefully this time will be a different outcome.
Fingers crossed, of course, fingers crossed. And Nicola, I understand this is a rather general question, but what tangible gains do you suppose does Korea look to secure from venturing into the final frontier?
Well, first of all, touching on what Sebastien has said, there is the issue of prestige, and this is an indicator of, a space program is an indicator of the technical prowess of a nation. It's a natural next step for a sophisticated economy, and South Korea has already stated that it wants to carve out a larger slice of the global space economy and reach 10% of this by 2045, whereas it's about 1% just now. And so what this means is, first of all, yes, there are implications for national security. Previously, South Korea was more dependent on Russia to launch probes into orbit, and now it can do this independently. That's very important. But also there are business and job opportunities as well, and that's very tangible for the population. To meet these ambitions, it requires a lot of investment in the space industry. Jobs have been steadily rising in this industry, and the government is planning to double its investment here to 1.5 trillion won by 2027. And so there's a promise of long-term windfalls for a number of sectors that are linked to the space industry. And also there's been very beneficial research that has a knock-on effect on industries that include CAT scans or GPS navigation. And again, South Korea is now, when it's playing a bigger role, so it has a bigger seat at the table in terms of defining space policy, global space policy, and just what norms we should have in that sector.
Right. And Sebastien, as you mentioned, North Korea claims that it is ready to launch its spy satellite into space in the very near future. But there are pundits here who claim, or who cast doubt, that is, on the prospects of a successful launch by North Korea. Could you explain this for us?
Well, first, it's not the first time that, as we say, that North Korea launched a rocket with the aim of putting a satellite into orbit. It's already started under actually Kim Jong-il, so it's a long-term project. And there's always dividing claim about why North Korea is doing this, because of course there is the importance of launching a satellite, but it's also, some people argue it's a cover-up to do so-called ballistic technology tests, which are banned by UN Security Council. So by claiming that it's developing a space program, North Korea can tell the international community that it is not in breach with international rule, which is something, of course, that is denounced by the US, by South Korea, and most countries. But so there is a tactical dimension, but of course, at this stage, when we see the level where North Korea has arrived when it comes to nuclear arsenal, there's also a rationale to have satellites for observation. So there is clearly also a will from Pyongyang to get that kind of asset, that kind of technology, to be able to better monitor what South Korea is doing. And when Kim Jong-un is talking about developing a strike capability, of course, if you want to strike, you need also to know where to strike. You need to define the target. So having satellite is also part of this grand
ambition.
Yeah, great ambition. But the whole question is to what extent this is a projection, this is a real capability. There's still discussion about the previous satellite launch, where they could emit or not. So there's still a lot of question about, there's a lag between what North Korea pretend to be capable of doing and the reality.
Right. And beyond the Korean peninsula, Nicola, what can you share with us about the UK's space ambitions?
The UK, well, in 2021, then Prime Minister Boris Johnson declared he wanted to create galactic Britain. And so behind that slogan lies the UK ambition to become the first country in Europe to be able to launch a small satellite from Europe. I'm sure it's been very competitive with France. And the UK is a world leader already in satellite manufacture. It's the home to major space businesses, but it doesn't yet have the capability to launch these satellites itself on its own territory. So that's a major goal. And earlier this year, there was an attempt in Cornwall in the south of the country, and that unfortunately failed. But other spaceports are being developed in Scotland, in the north, and also in Wales. So hopefully that should come relatively soon. And Britain's space industry is also worth £16 billion a year and employs some 45,000 at the moment as scientists and engineers, innovators, and it will be a big employer in future. The UK also aims to be a leader in modest low orbit technology, commercial satellites, which have applications from high-speed broadband to helping with climate change. And then on the defence side as well, it's just published a defence space strategy last year, and it wants to be a meaningful actor to keep space safe, secure and sustainable. That's the goal. That will involve a lot more investment and also have national security implications for surveillance on competitive powers as well.
Right, of course. And Sebastien, I hear France has put space at the center of its defense strategy in recent years. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, space is one of the new frontiers of the next legislation that will, the next military budget that they are currently discussing in France in the coming weeks, that will define and prepare a steep increase of the military budget until 2030. We're talking almost about the doubling of the military budget by the end of the decade. And space, for the first time, is seen as one of the strategic area where France wants to beef up its capability. And it's, of course, drawing the lessons from what we are seeing first on the global scene, where you see the US, China have been investing massively in space. It seems like space is becoming like a potential battleground in the case of a future identity conflict. But there's also a lesson drawn more immediately from Ukraine, where we see that space is playing a growing role when we think about satellite observation satellites that are feeding Ukrainian force, helping them to detect a Russian operation. Where we talk also about Starlink, that was like a different case, but still it shows how mastering space is essential to your operation on the ground, and not to mention drones which are playing a growing role. So against all this backdrop, there's certainly a wake-up call in France, and of course France is trying to push that at the EU level, with the idea that space is a key component of so-called strategic autonomy. So they want to say, we need to know, if you want to be able to assess and make decisions, you need to have the data first, and you need to be able to get those data by yourself. So it's also a political background in the EU at the moment, with growing influence from NATO, from the US, a renewed influence. So space is becoming a very heated debate politically, not just technologically. And to finish also, there is this, now France has announced they will launch a third generation spy satellite in order to beef up those capabilities. And interestingly, those satellites used to be launched by a Russian rocket, Soyuz, and since Ukraine war, they have to launch it from Guyana with a European rocket. So the world is changing also in that field.
Right, it really is, it really is. And meanwhile, back here on Earth, Nicola, these past few days, if I may, they've seen a flurry of diplomatic engagements among global leaders here in this part of the world. First of all, we had, let's talk a bit about President Yoon Suk-yeol's meeting with British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak on the sidelines of the G7 summit in neighbouring Japan.
Okay, well, yes, this is the first meeting between the two leaders, and it also happens to be the anniversary, the 140-year anniversary of UK and Korean ties, diplomatic ties. And so there was a lot of discussion about how to strengthen these bilateral ties on the global stage, and increase cooperation between the two countries. So it was reported that on President Yoon's side, he wants to see more bilateral cooperation on the issue of nuclear power, on digital partnership, on cybersecurity, on national security and the economy. And then Downing Street reported that Prime Minister Sunak had said that he first of all praised South Korea as being a global leader, and then he had set out the UK's own developing Indo-Pacific strategy, its ambitions for the AUKUS partnership as well, nuclear-powered submarines, and just what it's doing more in the region. And he also spoke about how important South Korea was as a partner in the Asia-Pacific region. And he proposed drafting some kind of detailed plan on UK and South Korean cooperation. He also spoke about energy, defence, and how to cooperate more on that, and on semiconductors, which is obviously becoming much more important to everyone just now. And then it was also reported that the two leaders inevitably discussed North Korea and how it was deeply destabilising the region.
Right, and following his one-on-ones in neighbouring Japan, Sebastien, President Yoon also sat down with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz here in Seoul on Sunday, as well as with EU leaders this past Monday, Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel. Speaking within your capacity as a journalist, Sebastien, what would you say is the importance of ties between South Korea and Europe?
Well, it was the first visit of a German Chancellor in 30 years in Korea, and it's the first EU-Korea summit actually in person since the pandemic. So there's a clear sign of a growing communication again between Korea and Europe, and it also highlights the growing role of Korea against the backdrop of Sino-US tension. There is a sense, as Nicola said also, that Korea has a key role to play when it comes to semiconductors, security, economic security, supply chain. So you see these European leaders who are trying to come here and realizing that they need to have a conversation here. But at the same time, you can also see the lag between what they are doing and what, for example, the US is doing. When you think about Joe Biden made his first visit as soon after being president, his first foreign visit, he came to Seoul, he spent more than 2 days. Meanwhile, you have Chancellor Scholz, who just stopped over a couple of hours. EU leaders also a couple of hours yesterday. So there's a big gap between the role that EU wants to do and what the US are doing, of course, when it comes to security. So both sides are saying they want to beef up cooperation in security on Ukraine, on all the issue like economic security. But still, what can be delivered? That's the big question that we are all waiting to see, because it cannot be just about words and a nice photo opportunity. So we'll see in the coming months if that's translated into some tangible outcome.
Right, something more concrete then. On a light note, Nicola, there was a bit of media coverage about Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's red socks in neighbouring Japan. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So Prime Minister Sunak became an unlikely fashion icon when he was at the summit. He wore special red socks that had the logo of the Hiroshima Toyo Carp baseball team, which happens to be Prime Minister Kishida's favourite baseball team. He made a quip that he hoped that they were having a better season than his favourite football team, Southampton, who apparently aren't doing very well. And the socks went viral in Japan and sold out. So there are only 5 shops in Hiroshima that sold these particular socks, and people were reportedly queuing up to get them, and the designer said that she felt like she was in a dream, and she was really shocked. And so this dinner was to actually talk about the Hiroshima Accords, which is a cooperation deal between the UK and Japan on defence. But I think the socks definitely won the day and got more headlines that day.
Right, it really did, and I wouldn't mind owning a pair, actually. Sebastien, here in Korea, meanwhile, last week, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau received quite a bit of positive media attention here in the country, of course, given his pose with National Assembly Speaker Kim Jin-pyo. Do explain that for us, and also do include the criticism from some Canadians itself.
Well, I mean, it was probably the highlights of it. Actually was a 3 days visit. It was a state visit by Justin Trudeau. So he spent much more time than the European leaders did in Seoul. He even addressed the National Assembly. That's where there was this picture that went viral on social media. I mean, interestingly, he got positive coverage in South Korea about this. I mean, because you could have imagined some people seeing this as dismissive or as showing lack of respect, but actually it was seen as a very positive gesture by most netizens here. But of course, this kind of visit, this kind of picture always draw different kind of reaction. Back home, you always criticize your own leader. So some people saw this as a lack of courtesy from Trudeau, which is facing a domestic challenging environment at the moment with a lot of controversy on many different domestic issues. So, of course, this is just a light touch on a visit that was actually also a sign of re-engagement of Canada, was trying to find allies in Asia as its relationship with China is getting tougher and tougher, there are currently some discussion about possible China's interference in political scene in Canada. So we can see that Canada is trying to diversify its relationship in the region, and so beyond that fun picture that there is a will to be more present here.
Right. Well, here at the Carter, the effort to kind of level out your height, actually, I think it's a rather considerate gesture with regard to those around you then. Nicola, do you believe the G7 summit in Hiroshima has perhaps served to reaffirm the importance of such gatherings to better deal with global concerns?
Yes, so British Telecom used to have a slogan, advertising slogan saying, "It's good to talk." And I think that also holds very, very true when it comes to international diplomacy and geopolitics. And we live in a world now where the international order is really shifting, and there's an increasing confrontation between authoritarianism, democracies. And it is important, it's an important opportunity for democracies to align their positions on certain issues. And that's certainly what we saw at the G7 in Hiroshima. We saw very firm consensus and strong messaging on divisive issues. We saw a united front on Ukraine, for example, and the need to avert war. But one of the most important messages was on economic coercion and how to tackle that, with Beijing increasingly turning to tactics of economic coercion to use trade sanctions against countries that it's displeased with. And the leaders put out a common statement on that. I'm sure they were talking in the sidelines as well about how best to protect supply chains and their industries against this kind of coercion, how to coordinate that. And that's important not only for the G7, but globally. Australia, South Korea have also faced those kind of issues with China. And it was also a meaningful gesture of Prime Minister Kishida to invite many others to the table. So we saw not only the G7, but also Australia, South Korea, Indonesia, India, among others, representing the African Union and also the Pacific Island nations. And that really helped to make the G7 look less of an elitist club and is more of a forum where they were listening to partners, listening to their concerns about certain issues. And again, that's important at a time when China and Russia are at the center of a lot of global challenges. Many countries are still trying to work out how they're going to navigate relations with China, Russia, and with the democracies of the G7. So that was an incredibly important message.
Right, it was. And very briefly speaking, Sebastien, what are your thoughts regarding the latest effort to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine and counter China as well as curb North Korea's nuclear ambitions?
I mean, the G7, as Nicola said, has been facing a kind of legitimacy issue in the past decade, facing all these emerging countries. So they're trying to patch up, to open up, to remain relevant, and they made very strong statement. Having said that, we shouldn't be mistaken also by the fact that, you know, if we look at the bigger picture, you have a growing number of emerging countries who are don't want to take side, including on the democratic side or versus China. And increasingly, you see these emerging countries who just want to do business, and they are ready to work with China, they are ready to work with Russia, and they are getting tired of that insistence on Ukraine that the European, the Western countries are pushing for. So there is also a risk of the picture of the G7. Behind the scene, a lot of these countries, they want to be open to business with everyone. And at this very moment of the G7, China was holding an important summit with Central Asian states. It's also developing its relationship in the Middle East with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, which are key economic player also there. So the picture is behind this strong signal. The world is becoming increasingly open, and the voice from Western democracies is clearly in decline.
Right, but hopefully more talks will be underway to better deal with such issues then. All right, Sebastien, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Nicola, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends Wednesday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow, that is Thursday.